Well, Shadow of the Erdtree is 1 week away at this point. That is not long at all. And the question is, are you ready? Have you gotten your character ready? Is your save ready? Are you prepared to go into the DLC? So in this video, we're going to talk about whether or not you are prepared and what you should do between now and a week from now. So the first thing we're going to talk about is character level and roughly what level your character should be. From the play sessions that happened a few weeks ago, we know that characters were set at level 150 to go play that demo. So that's, kind of loosely what the level the developers are recommending for that area. And also we know that the difficulty of the DLC is roughly that of endgame of Elden Ring. So areas like Mountaintops of the Giants or Mikla's Erdtree, areas like that is roughly going to be the difficulty of the beginning areas of the DLC. Theoretically, it will get harder as you progress, but that would mean that your character should be around a level 150. We also do know, too, as well, that enemies hit very, very hard compared to enemies in the base game, and that's because of the Skadu tree fragments that, increase the damage protection that you have and also increase your damage. So as you pick up more of these, enemies will do less and less damage. But initially, when you don't have any of these, you're going to take lots of damage from even regular enemies. So having a good health pool is a pretty good idea at the beginning. So you're going to want to have at least 50 or 60 vigor, or maybe a talisman that increases your HP or something like that. So do not neglect your vigor when you go into the DLC. Make sure you have a good amount and that your character level is high enough that you can handle endgame content easily. And the next thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you have a significant number of golden seeds and sacred tears, and you've turned them in at sites of grace in order to upgrade not only the number of flasks that you have, but also how effective those flasks are. If you go into the DLC and you do not have a lot of flasks, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So, regardless of what character level you go in, if you have 5 flasks, it's going to be tough for you. Even if your character level is 200 or 250 or something like that, you're going to have a harder time. So make sure that you have a good amount of flasks and they've been upgraded in significant ways. They don't have to be maxed out. I myself don't have them completely maxed out on my character, but I have like 90 or 95% of them. I recommend, particularly if you're an average player like me, getting that, fairly high up there so that you have plenty of flasks to rely on and that they're strong. And we have the locations of these on our Elden Ring map. So if you can't remember where they all are, or maybe you have a good amount of flasks, but you just want a few more before you go in, make sure to use our map and check out where those are in order to pick those up easily and save yourself a bunch of time. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to get is Talisman Pouches. Again, this is something I covered in our previous video, but if you don't remember, you gain Talisman Pouches as you progress the game, and you don't actually begin the game with 4 talisman slots. You begin with 1, and as you progress, you unlock more and more. So the first one is from defeating Margit. You'll have 2 talisman slots after defeating him, and then after defeating 2 or getting 2 great runes and speaking to Finger Eater Enya, you'll be able to get a 3rd talisman pouch. So you might have to defeat, like Godric and then Renala or something like that, and then go speak to Finger Eater Enya after getting their great runes. And then the last one is Godfrey, First Elden Lord, which is located at the very end of the Lendel Royal Capital. So that's quite a ways into the game, and that'll give you your 4th talisman slot. So you can see already that you're going to, if you were playing organically, you would be quite a ways into the game before you had those talisman slots. Now, you can absolutely go into the DLC with 1 or 2 less talisman slots. It's not going to be the end of the world. But obviously, every little point here, if you're a little bit lower level, you have a little bit less flasks, you have 1 less talisman slot, is all going to add up to making it more challenging. So you probably want to make sure you're at least that far into the game and have all your talisman slots. If you're using an existing character that's already completed the game, this is not going to be an issue for you. Now, the next thing to consider is upgrade materials and bell bearings. Obviously, whatever weapon you're using, you want to have it maxed out. Whether that's your talisman or your melee weapon or both, you want to make sure that they're completely maxed out going in there so you do the most damage possible. Additionally, you're going to want to have upgrade materials in reserve for any equipment that you pick up, any weapons or shields that you want to upgrade. So make sure that you have the bell bearings in the game. Again, we have the locations of those on the wiki if you can't remember where to get them, so that you can purchase upgrade materials. You might want to farm a bit, purchase a bunch of these so you have like a backlog of upgrade materials. So if you find a sweet weapon that you just want to crank up a bunch and see how it does in the DLC, you can do that. So make sure you hoard your upgrade materials, and they're ready to go for weapons that you have. If the DLC comes out and you find a weapon you want to use and you don't have any upgrade materials, you're going to be annoyed that you have to go farm them or whatever. So make sure that's prepared ahead of time. The next thing is that you have to have defeated Radahn and Mohg in order to enter the DLC through the Mohgwyn Palace. So if you haven't done either of these things, you need to go do those before you're going to be able to have access to the DLC. If you have completed the game on a character already, or you're like near end game, you'll probably done these things, so that's not a big deal. But Mohg can be quite far into the game if you don't go the invasion route, Various quest line. The details of that are on the wiki though, so if you want to speed there and you want to get there very quickly on a new character, you can check out his quest line on the wiki in order to be able to pull that off quickly. The other thing I'll say too, that these are two of the harder bosses in Elden Ring, so if you can beat both of these bosses with your character, then you're probably going to be in pretty good shape for the DLC. If you're struggling with these bosses with a build, then you're probably going to struggle in the DLC as well. So kind of, use this as a litmus test, if you will, to see how your build is. Like if you can barely finish off Mohg and barely finish off Radahn, then you might have a hard time on these bosses. It's not always true, because obviously as you learn the movesets, you get better at these bosses. And, you're going to have to learn movesets of new bosses, etc. But it should give you a rough idea. Like, is the build capable of beating the boss? Or is it really, really struggling and you have to make a bunch of changes? And this kind of leads me into my next point, which is, make sure your build is ready to go. Make sure you have all the talismans you want for your build, the spells you want if you're using spells or incantations. Make sure that you, basically have everything ready. And one thing I can highly recommend going into the DLC is make sure you have some sort of ranged option. I do a lot of builds that, are melee or ranged, but don't have a lot of mixed melee and range. And I would highly recommend that you have at least a ranged option. A lot of us have played Elden Ring a lot. I have over 2,000 hours in this game at this point. And it's just, you know where the enemies are going to be. You can avoid them or kill them easily. So you don't remember what it's like a lot of time when you're first exploring an area, that sometimes a guy's standing up on a balcony ranging shots at you, and if with no ranged option, you can't hit him, So make sure you have some sort of ranged option in your repertoire, whether that's spells or a bow or throwing items, so you can take down a ranged enemy if you're playing a melee character. Another thing that I want to mention too is that a lot of our pre-coverage talked about builds with stance damage, and that we didn't know quite back then how the Erdtree fragment would work. We've since learned that it just increases your damage and damage resistance, and your damage is not nerfed or anything like that. Enemies just have larger health pools and they hit harder, so it feels like you're kind of at the beginning of the game again. That's generally how I understand it to be. So, what I had originally theorized is that stance damage would be a good way around this, but one thing that I want to mention is a lot of stance damage builds are optimized when you know the stance values of bosses. When you know that a boss's stance values 80 or 90 or 110 or whatever it is, you can figure out what the Ash of War weapon skill stance damage does, and then calculate whether that's going to work against that boss or how many hits exactly you need to do. And that information is much easier after we have that data. So that could be, a week or two into the DLC before we have that data. I don't know exactly how long it'll be before we have all that data on the wiki, but it might not necessarily be the best strategy when we don't know those values, because it's possible that the bosses might be harder or have more stance, and that might invalidate that strategy a little bit. That's not to say that it can't work and that stance damage is bad or anything like that. It's just to say that keep in mind that your stance damage build, if you're running one, might not work completely optimized day one when you get into the DLC, and you might have to tweak it around a little bit once you start figuring out how many hits it takes to stagger this type of enemy or that type of enemy. Another thing that I'll mention that you want to have probably stocked up before you go into the DLC is Larval Tears. Larval Tears allow you to respec at Rennala, and as you pick up different weapons in the DLC that seem awesome to you and you want to check them out, you might not have the stat requirements for them, or maybe you do have the stat requirements, but all your points are intelligence, and this weapon scales mostly with strength, and you might have to go respec to be optimally set up to use that weapon. So make sure you have a bunch of these. There are, again, you can find these on our map or on the wiki in order to know exactly where they are, but make sure you got a bunch. That way you can just respec when you find a new weapon if you want, and you can try out a bunch of different ones and, experiment and have a good time with it. And then the very last thing I want to mention is that once you have all this stuff done, right? Like once you're ready to go into the DLC, your character has all this done. They're level 150. They have all the golden seeds, sacred tears, talismans, upgrade materials, bosses defeated, your build's ready, etc. you should consider backing up your save no matter what platform you're on. Putting a save aside from this point, like manually putting it on your desktop in a folder somewhere, or if you have it on PlayStation, backing it up onto a USB drive or Xbox or something like that, so that once you get through the DLC, if you want to play through again, let's say you messed up some NPC quest lines, or you didn't like the way a certain thing happened, or maybe you just missed some stuff, or maybe you just want to play it again with a different build, etc. You can just, drop that save in and then play again and not have to go through the whole game again on another character, or go through New Game Plus and unlock all these things again in order to play again. So consider backing up your save so that you can just, reload it when you want to play through the DLC again. So that wraps up our video on exactly what to do to prepare for the Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. I hope that most of you guys at this point are mostly through these things, or all the way through these with a week left, or just wrapping up the final things on this, because it would really suck to get to the day that Shadow of the Erdtree comes out, and you're ready to play, and your character hasn't defeated Mohg or hasn't defeated Radahn, and you can't play with that limited time that you have. So make sure you do these things ahead of time, so that way when the DLC drops, you're just ready to go. And as always, if there are other tips to give people, something that I completely spaced or messed up and didn't add here, make sure you leave that in the comments for them, or if you have questions, leave them there and I'll try and answer them. We do have more Elden Ring content coming before the launch of the DLC on the 21st, so stay tuned for that. I don't know exactly what we're going to lead off with for Shadow of the Erdtree DLC content. I have some ideas, but if you have suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments below.